Hi, Tom. We're here today to discuss the Cultural Connection Tour in 2017. Hopefully, we are going to get this launched before May and see whether we can get this tour off the ground. We hope to tour in New Zealand, Australia, India, Germany, and New York in the U.S. We've asked some of our team in the various countries to give us some feedback on what they would like you to talk about and how they would like you to bring your MBT theory into their culture. So let's start with the first countries. I think we've talked about this before. In New Zealand and Australia, we have indigenous cultures. Could you present a little bit of a summary of the commonalities that you might identify with these cultures that MBT would support?
Well, one of the nice things about the MBT model is that it doesn't deal in any dogma, any belief systems, anything that is very specific to any culture. It just talks about the big picture. And the big picture is common to all cultures. So consciousness is common to all cultures. So it's not really a cultural thing that I bring to these cultures. What I bring is a way of looking at the world. And as it turns out, in most all of these indigenous cultures, much less the ones that are just major cultures in the world, like India, and Australia, Europe. We have these various cultures. They all have their own viewpoints of what that big picture looks like through the lens of their own culture. And as it turns out, and we'll add all the religions of the world to that too, let's add Christianity and Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism and all the other isms that, are out there in the world that are, all those other isms that are out there in the world. Those perspectives appear to be very different if you just look at the face of them. If you just look at the poetry, the words, the descriptions, and the metaphors that they use, the metaphors are all very different. Very, very different. The names that they apply are very, very different. So we have different terminology, we have different metaphors, but we have the same fundamental truth running through all of them. This is one, I shouldn't say one, but there's these ideas that are common. And it's not a new idea. Lots of people have studied world religions and cultures and found out that there are similar truths. Carl Jung called these archetypes. And there's cultural archetypes, but then above that, at a higher level, there are human archetypes. There are things that humans just get in their blood and sinew level of beings, things that they just know, that ring true to them, make sense to them. And the beauty of MBT is that it's acultural. It's not about a culture. It looks at the big picture. Why are we here? What's our mission? What are our goals to be here? What is here? What is this universe that we live in? Why is it here? Where did it come from? And we have these big picture questions that have been asked of people, in all times, of all cultures, you see, and they've come up with their own language and their own metaphors to answer these questions. But the questions are the same, so the answers tend to be the same, whereas people dig the answers out of their inner selves, out of their deepest levels of their consciousness is where the answers come from. And consciousness is indeed the root of the big picture. That's really the origin of this big picture. So it's to be expected that the same fundamental truths are going to be running through all of these ideas.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because our friend Keppa in New Zealand has found your My Big Toe theory to resonate very deeply with his ancient culture, his ancient Maori culture. He's found it to resonate very deeply and have a lot of similarities with your My Big Toe.
Yes, and that's not real surprising to me, because the metaphors he uses and the words he uses will be entirely different, but the concepts are fundamentally the same. Yes. I have given talks, and afterwards people will come up to me and they say, "Are you a Zen Buddhist?" I've been studying Zen Buddhism for 2 decades. I live it and breathe it, and you talk just like a Zen Buddhist. You sound just exactly like what I've been studying. And I say, no, I'm not particularly a Zen Buddhist, but the truth's the truth, and we see it through different lenses, and mostly what's different is the metaphors that we use to describe it, and the names, the poetry that's cultural, you see. And I've had that same thing happen in other religions. I just got an email the other day, and it was from a person who had studied Islam. And he said, "I've been watching your videos, and a lot of what you say is exactly what the Prophet, revealed to us." And he goes on about how a lot of the things are the same way. And I've gotten it from Christians about how this kind of brings their beliefs into modern times.
That's right.
It's the same ideas, you see. But what I bring to these ideas isn't that the ideas themselves are terribly unique to me. What I have done is understood them in a scientific sense, in a logical sense, in a way that you can derive the various components. Yes, God is love. Well, that's a good thought, and everybody thinks about that, says, yeah, that feels right, that's good. But in MBT theory, you can explain exactly why that is, where that comes from. Why is God love, and what does love have to do with it anyway? You see, it all now becomes a logical understanding once you understand the nature of consciousness, then the nature of ourselves as consciousness, and then the nature of our physical reality here, physical with quote marks around it, the physical reality that is really a virtual reality. When you understand how that works, in other words, when you understand the physics, then the metaphysics and the theology falls out, you see, as a consequence of understanding consciousness. So physics falls out of consciousness, metaphysics falls out of consciousness, theology falls out of consciousness, and then you travel the world and you realize that all these other cultures and peoples have come to very similar conclusions. But one of the problems that they face is Western culture is sort of taking over the world. Western consumer culture, where, the idea is to make lots of money and buy things and we in the West have had our fill and maybe more of that, but it's the capitalist economic model, socialist economic models are now becoming one. They're kind of merging in various places in the world. And as Western culture, this economic culture basically takes over, young people are growing up and letting go of the traditional values. They're looking at the things in their past, deep in their history, their religious values, their ethical values, and they're not seeing or they're not feeling that tug to honor those values. They're feeling like, yeah, that's the old stuff. My grandparents did that. My parents maybe think that too. But in the modern world, we don't believe all that mumbo jumbo. That's for the old folks. Well, that's a shame because there's a lot of truth in those histories, in those cultures, and a lot of value there. And if the young people let that go, they will end up feeling shallow, unconnected, not a part of the bigger picture, because that's where that connection comes from. Their connection, to the bigger picture, to the world around them, even to other people, comes out of that deep understanding of who they are, what they are, and kind of their connection to the larger existence. So one of the things that MBT brings is it takes those old truths that are across all cultures and most all indigenous people, puts them into terminology that's very suitable to the 21st century, puts them in terms of metaphors that are contemporary, and instead of poetry, it's science and logic, you see, because this Western culture that's growing all over the world, some might say like a cancer, others may say, it's a great benefit, but however you look at that, whether you look at it as cancer or benefit, it's there, it's coming, and it's growing because everybody wants a piece of that big economic pie. And once the economics becomes the key thing, then the old ideas of quality and the old ideas of your place in the cosmos starts to feel kind of dated and not so pressing anymore. Well, MBT takes these old truths and rediscovers them in the view of science, in the view of logic. And it's not just that the metaphors have been swapped, it's that this is a wholly new start. It's like we start from scratch. What is consciousness? Where did it come from? What is it? We answer that question, and from there we logically derive these same basic truths that are at the heart of the Maori tribal tradition, you see, and that are at the heart of Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity and Islam, and on and on and on. We see these same truths in Judaism. We see these same fundamental truths. Now, we don't pick up any of the dogma because, as MBT derives it, it's science. There's nothing you have to believe. There's nothing you have to memorize. There's no dogma in it at all. There's no creed. There's no rituals that need to be gone through. It doesn't bring you any of that. All that needs to stay with the culture. All of those things stay with the culture, where they belong, where the roots are, you see. But the ideas, the truths, the fundamentals of who we are, what's the big picture, where do we come from, what should we be doing, what's important in life, how to relate to other people, you see, how do we relate to the earth, how do we relate to the critters, all this sort of big picture stuff. Now that can be put in terms of science, in terms of logic, which is where the people who are being overrun by Western culture, what they're turning to is logic and science. That's kind of the new religion. Science becomes the new religion and logic becomes the new religion, and if these traditions aren't in the metaphors of science and religion, well, that's just old stuff and it doesn't seem to fit anymore, you see. But that doesn't mean you throw away these things because they're necessary. They do embody the truth. They do embody the culture. But what you do is say, well, look, these same ideas we've had for 4,000 years are true. They've always been true. And here's the science and the logic to demonstrate it. You see? So it's not a replacement of other cultures. It's not a believe this instead of that sort of thing. That's not it at all. It's like grasping a bigger picture. Seeing the same old traditional truths in terms of a different set of metaphors, a different perspective, So you're not throwing anything away. You're just opening up and putting your arms around something larger. Here's another way to express it. And
I like that very much.
Yeah, I think it's beneficial, particularly to the young people, because the young people are turning away from traditions as this Western culture kind of overwhelms societies, and that is not a good thing.
I like the fact that you can keep the culture, as you say. That's what we're about. We're going to these places where the cultures are different, but you're saying keep them, just look at it in a bigger picture.
Yeah, see the bigger picture, see the truth, see the fundamentals that are there. And what it does is it lends some credibility, if you will, to the young people about your traditions. Your traditions are now speaking truth. You see, that's been shown to be scientific and logical.
That's very good.
You see, it's not that these are just old traditions you can throw away and forget about because they belong to grandpa and great-grandpa. Mm-hmm. It's that these are traditions that speak the truth. You need to pay attention to these traditions, and they are expressed in the manner of your culture, which means they fit you like a glove, because that is your culture. So you keep that, but you also have the understanding of why they're truth, the science behind them. You see that they're not just things that people made up, but it is the way the world is. So basically it's tradition supported by science. Tradition. You see, not tradition supplanted by science, but tradition supported by science. The culture's in your blood. You come from a particular culture. That's in your DNA, this culture. And it would be really nice if you can have your culture and your science and your logic, and there's no difference. It's not like, well, here's my religion over here, and now here's my science and my logic over here, and these two things are separate. You see, they shouldn't be separate. Here's my culture and my tradition, and here's my science and my logic, and they all fit in the same basket, and they all make sense together. Well,
I think that is what Devendra, our next country stop, in India, Devendra in New Delhi is asking. He's saying, obviously in India there would be a need to connect MBT with the age-old teachings of the spiritual gods and gurus that abound in this ancient civilization. Many recent gurus, including Yogananda and Aurobindo, have talked and written extensively about various levels of consciousness and even remote viewing, astral travel, and out-of-body experiences. How does MBT fit into those teachings, which came about without science?
Yes, well, of course they came about without science. And that maybe depends on how you define science. They came about because they are the logical result of an understanding of the nature of consciousness. People have been conscious since the very beginning. People have gone inward, explored inner space long before they thought about exploring outer space, or at least long before they could explore outer space. And these people who thought very deeply and long about inner space and about purpose and about what's the nature of reality, they had the ability to connect to their consciousness, their conscious source, just as anybody does today. And they have the ability to find out all the same truths, because consciousness, you see, is the root of it all. So we start with consciousness. Well, 4,000 years ago, people were conscious. People connected with the larger consciousness system. People asked questions, got answers, understood what was going on, saw revelations, had dialogue with other entities. However it happened, you see, all of this came about. All of this, and I would call it the study of consciousness, and you might even call it a scientific study of consciousness, although it was all subjective rather than objective. But still, from that study of consciousness, that inward journey, they came up with these truths. That was the source ground of these traditions, of the world's religions, is several people learned to go inward and to understand the nature of consciousness. And then They taught others, and then eventually it became a religion. So I've done nothing other than that. I've studied consciousness. I've learned to go inward and study the inner space rather than so much the outer space. And in doing so, I have discovered certain truths. And because I live in the 21st century, I was able to relate those truths. And because I had a scientific background, I'm a physicist, I was able to relate those truths to science and see how that the consciousness, the viewpoint of reality from consciousness also defines science. It defines quantum mechanics. It defines relativity. It defines, logic. It's a logical system. Before, people who had similar insights, they had to express these insights in metaphors that suited them and their culture. They used words like the Buddha, describing that this physical world is an illusion. Well, what's different than that when I say it's a virtual reality? You see, we're saying the same thing. We come to the same conclusions. But now I also have the last decade of scientific research backing up the fact that it's a virtual reality. Indeed, that we finally, 4,000 years later, or maybe 2,500 years later, I'm not sure of the date, 2,500 years later, science confirms what Buddha thought, right? It is all Maya. It is a virtual reality. It is all illusion. So it's just that, you see. So it's not that we say, oh, listen to me, I'm right and the Buddha's wrong. Nonsense. The Buddha was right. He just couldn't say, oh, it's a virtual reality, a computed reality, like World of Warcraft. You see, he didn't have that, he didn't have those concepts of computers and how virtual reality is created, how it is a calculated reality. It's a math-based reality. Why does all our science, why does our reality, why can we describe it with mathematics? Because it's math-based to begin with. It's calculated. It's a calculated reality frame, you see. So it's not that, the Buddha got it wrong. It's the Buddha got it right. And finally, the metaphors come along to explain in scientific, contemporary, 21st century terms and metaphors just what the Buddha was telling us. So it's not replacing anything, you say. If anything, it's breathing new life and new vigor into these old traditional systems of philosophy.
Well, Devendra goes on to ask, in a nation that believes in karma and dharma and the lessons of yoga, does MBT say anything that contradicts these traditions, or is it a way of corroborating and expanding on these?
It's a way of corroborating and expanding them. Not only do you have those traditions, but you see why. Where did they come from? What is the basis of karma? Why does it work that way? Why is there such a thing as karma? What is it? How does it how can you logically derive it? So it expands it, looks at it from again, contemporary metaphors, bigger picture. That's really what I bring. And for several reasons, that's handy. One, like I say, the youth tends to be moving away from the traditions. And this now puts those traditions right back on the path that the youth are moving toward, which is the logic-based, science-based view of the world, you see? And suddenly these traditions, instead of being something, off that path, it's right square back on that path. So that's what I mean. It breathes more vigor, it makes these traditions old but also contemporary. And if anything, I think the people within these traditions should say, wow, look at this. We had it right all along. We really understand the world. And people called us just, religions that didn't make any sense, or, where's the science? Prove it, this sort of thing. And we as religions just had to settle for our belief rather than have science or the prove it, the logic. And now you have both.
That's great. Reincarnation is also inbuilt into their belief system in India. What does MBT say about this?
Well, reincarnation is built into MBT's theory as well. And the reason that it is, not because I thought reincarnation was such a nifty idea, but because the logic demands it. You see, I derive things in MBT. This is not what Tom Campbell thinks about the world. This is logic and science starting from two assumptions, and that is consciousness exists and evolution exists, and then working the logic. And part of that logic says reincarnation is a necessary logical part of the process. You can't get along without it, you see. And why is that? Because we have the purpose here to learn, to grow, to increase the quality of our consciousness, become more spiritual, become love. However you want to say that, that is our purpose. Well, learning is cumulative. You see, it has to be cumulative. You're not going to learn all this all at the same time. It's too big and too broad and too deep. So it takes many lifetimes to learn these things, because it's not learning at the intellectual level. It's not that you have to intellectually understand it. It's that you have to be it. You have to learn it at the being level, at the root, at the core of your being is where the learning takes place. If you just learn it intellectually, there's almost no bonus points for that at all. It's just intellectual. And you can memorize the old traditions, or you can memorize MBT, and you can learn the right answers for all the questions, and it doesn't mean a thing if you don't have that understanding at the core of your being. The fact that it's in your intellect is nice, and maybe even helps a little, put it in perspective, but that's not where the value is. The value is at a deeper level than that. So, yes, reincarnation is a logical necessity in this process. Otherwise, you can't get from where we are to where we need to be. It's, you can't, first you have to learn, let's put it this way, first you have to learn to add, then you learn to subtract, then you learn to multiply, then you learn to divide. That's called arithmetic. And until you understand arithmetic, there's no point trying to learn algebra. So now you learn algebra, and there's absolutely no point in trying to learn calculus until you understand algebra. And there's no point at all in trying to understand differential equations until you understand calculus. You see, and so on it goes, because one thing is built upon the knowledge of the other. Well, that's the way it is growing up. It's not like you can come here and say, all right, I don't know anything at all about numbers. I don't know arithmetic or anything else, but I'm going to start with differential equations. You won't get anywhere. None of it will make any sense. You won't have the concepts to deal with it, to understand it. Well, that's the way it is about growing up to become love. It takes a lot of time, a lot of iteration, a lot of things you have to learn first. You have to let go of fear. You have to let go of ego. You have to let go of belief. All these things that get in our way. And that is not an easy thing to do at the being level. It's not so hard at the intellectual level. You can just convince yourself that that's the way it is and kind of pretend to do it. Now you're a good actor, but it doesn't make you a good person. You see, that requires change at the being level. So yes, these concepts that are in Hinduism and in Buddhism, particularly talking to Devendra, are for the most part logical necessities of MBT.
Some of the other cultural aspects or lifestyle practices there are vegetarianism, avoiding alcohol and drugs. Do they have any mention in MBT?
Yes, they do have a mention in MBT. And they have a mention in several ways with MBT. And one is that we're talking about consciousness here as the fundamental thing. And one of the ways you grow is by getting in touch with your consciousness. Well, diet has a lot to do with your success of getting in touch with your consciousness. It makes a big difference to your consciousness as to what you've been feeding your body. Well, why would that be? What does the body have to do with it? Virtual reality? Consciousness and body are totally separate. But the body is our avatar, just like the elf is our avatar in World of Warcraft. The body is our avatar, and by being our avatar, it sets the constraints on what it is we as consciousness can do, on the choices that we have. For instance, my avatar can't jump 20 feet in the air. So if I am consciousness and I say, oh, I'm consciousness, I command you, jump 20 feet in the air, my body won't do it because the body can't do that. You see, that's a constraint that it can't have. So I have to make my choices knowing that I have constraints according to the avatar. Well, it's the same way with the brain. The brain is just a virtual brain. But if that virtual brain gets damaged, that virtual brain gets a disease, then I, the consciousness, am constrained by that damage or that disease. I can only do certain things now with my avatar, certain choices I have that that I'm limited to that. So let's say my avatar got hit on the head and now can't walk very well, drags his left leg when it walks. Well, that's the way it is. Now I'm consciousness. I'm whole. Didn't affect me as consciousness, but my avatar now has to drag its leg because those nerves that went from the brain down to that leg have been severed or don't work so well anymore or traumatized. I have to deal with that. You see, so the constraints of the physical system on the consciousness is why what you eat affects your level of consciousness. If your physical system is out of balance and not functioning well, that sets constraints on what your consciousness can do with it. So yes, they are connected. And it's not that MBT says you have to become a vegetarian. MBT doesn't say that. MBT says that you need to eat in a way that does not affect your level of consciousness. Now, what people have found that being a vegetarian helps that process some. Other people don't find that. Almost everybody finds that eating sugar hurts their ability to be in touch with their consciousness, confuses their mind.
Alcohol.
Caffeine. Yes, nicotine. Yep. All the psychotropic drugs of all sorts, whatever they are, whether they're medicine or whether they're recreational, all the psychotropic drugs get in the way of you and your consciousness becoming one, really understanding of really exploring your consciousness. They all get in the way. So what MBT says is that you need a clear mind if you're going to be in touch with your consciousness. Well, I'm sure that's what the yogis 2,000 years ago discovered. That if they ate the wrong things, if they drank the wrong things, they lost touch. This very wonderful touch they had with the larger consciousness system, where they developed their ideas from. So what did they tell other people? Don't eat that stuff. Don't drink that stuff because it's not good for you. It gets you out of touch with what's real and what's important. So within those cultures, then, these things became maybe taboo, or it's part of the culture that you are a vegetarian in this, and that just became a cultural thing, you see. With MBT, we don't have rules, and we don't have what shall I say, rituals. We don't have things that say, well, everybody needs to do this or everybody needs to do that. We don't like telling people what it is they need to do. We just explain how the world works, how they can improve the quality of their life, how they can get rid of their fears, how they can increase the quality of their consciousness, and let them realize that these psychotropic substances get in the way a whole lot more than they help. Let them realize that what they eat affects the quality of their ability to think, because what's physical sets constraints on what's consciousness in this thing. So, yeah, we don't tend to tell people what they should do, and comes from a kind of We don't have that cultural perspective. We tell them the way we think it is and then let them make their own decisions in their own way and then let them deal with the consequences of their decisions. So it's MBT is a rather new thing. It's only been around for a couple of decades. A whole culture hasn't grown up around it or anything like that. So we don't have that sort of cultural impact as these older systems of thought would.
Of course. One last question and then a comment. Does a big toe make one discard religion? I think you've already answered that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make one discard it. And it in a way, I would have to say that it might or it might not. Depends on how you view religion. If you view religion as a set of rules I have to abide by, if you review religion as dogma, things I have to believe, if I believe this, God will like me. If I don't believe this, God won't like me, that sort of thing, then MBT will help you step away from that sort of religion. So the belief, we find out belief is the enemy. It doesn't matter about your belief, just like it doesn't matter how well you act, it's how well you are. Acting good is nice, but being good is better, you see, is real. So it's not behavior so much, it's intent. It's what's inside of you. So if you see religion as dogma and creed and belief, then you might tend to let that go. On the other hand, if you see religion as something that's spiritual, it's about understanding, it's about big pictures, it's about how you relate to what's bigger than you are and to what's on the same level as you are. How do you relate with people? How do you relate with what do we say, all that is, or with your God, or with the larger consciousness system? How do you relate to that? You see, now, no, you don't throw that away in religion. You keep that because religion is a perfectly valid way to grow spiritually. And MBT, not only do we derive science, but it is a process for growing spiritually. It's one process. Religion is another path. There's various paths you can take in growing spiritually. Now, if in your religion, what is important to you about that religion is your dogma, you love to argue with people who are different than your religion and tell them why you're right and they're wrong, sort of thing, then MBT will pull you away from that. But if what you value in your religion is the spiritual quality that it brings to your life, then MBT will only enhance that. It won't pull you away from that. It's basically saying, yes, that's truth. And what better way to absorb your truth than in terms that are common to your own culture? Why would you want to absorb it any other way? If it's the same truth, you absorb it in terms and metaphors common to your culture. That's good. So religion is another path, but religion can also be a swamp. It can be a lot of belief. It can be a lot of ego. It can be a lot of strutting. My way's better than your way. I'm right. You're wrong. You don't believe this, and God wants you to believe this. And when you get into that kind of
because of a lot of our problems over history. Yeah,
that's the problems. That's why religions fight with it. That's why there were religious wars. Yeah. It's because of this. When you get into the dogma and you become arrogant about it, my way is the only right way, sort of thing. Now that arrogance has led to many, many horrible things, many, many wars in the name of religion. Even if they were political wars, often they were in the name of religion because that's how you stirred up the common people, was to manipulate their fear and their religion. So religion has been the cause of much bad things in the world, but it's also been the cause of many good things in the world. And it gives us a lot of value as well. You just need to know what's that valuable truth to get a hold of and use as a guidance for your life, and what's that belief and that dogma to let go of, or at least see it in its proper perspective, as it's just a a cultural aspect of that religion, and it's okay. It may even be fun. You may even want to indulge in it and be part of it. That's fine. It's part of your culture. Nothing wrong with that. But you kind of see it for what it is. It's just beliefs, it's rituals, it's dogma. So that's the difference. So I would say MBT could pull some people away from religion, and others could pull much tighter to their religions. We have the lady who wrote to me and said, I'm a Christian. I'm a very serious Christian. And I carry 2 books with me wherever I go. My Big Toe and the Bible. Wow. And My Big Toe enhanced the meaning of her Bible.
That's quite a statement.
Because she said that she understood more about what the Bible was trying to say. In other words, the poetry and the metaphors of the Bible, when she heard them in more contemporary terms, she goes, oh, that's it. That's what they're trying to say.
That's wonderful.
So My Big Toe was an enhancement to her religion, not a replacement.
Wow.
To it. It made her religion more understandable for her. And I think that is,
that's valuable.
That's valuable. That's very valuable. Good. No, it doesn't say, I used to carry the Bible, now I carry My Big Toe. That wasn't it at all. No. It's that the My Big Toe kind of helped her interpret, helped her understand, helped her capture, her Christianity at a being level rather than just an intellectual level.
That is wonderful.
Because the Bible was written 2,000 years ago, or at least 1,500 years ago, and it was written in terms of metaphors and words and phrases and terms and ideas that are 1,500 years old, and a lot of people just don't relate. So they read it and it's yeah, but it doesn't really resonate and speak to me because it's really not my language anymore. It was written for the people and the time it was written for. But if you can see it in a bigger picture, then it does resonate with you because now you understand those metaphors. You see what they were really saying. And it's not that then you give up your religion, it's that you understand it better from a core viewpoint.
That is really
and
great.
Because it's your culture, then you can kind of put your arms around it more fully than you could before. So I don't think there's a basic conflict between My Big Toe and religion, other than the sense is My Big Toe is there's no dogma and no belief based in it. The larger consciousness system, which would be the metaphor that other people would call God, this larger consciousness system, which is the creator of all else, it's consciousness. Consciousness creates everything else. The system is not infinite, it's finite. It's not perfect, you see. So the larger conscious system in MBT isn't necessarily an equivalent to what most people call God. On the other hand, when I talked to 2 theologians in Atlanta, 2 years ago, I asked those theologians, I said, tell me all the characteristics of God. What are the fundamental attributes of God? So they spent a little time and they listed 5 or 6 or 7 things that were the basic attributes of this concept of God. And the larger conscious system met every one of them. Yeah, the larger conscious system had all those same attributes, you see. But they did not list things like dogma or that kind of thing. They just listed what are the fundamental things. So yeah, the larger conscious system is the creator. We, consciousness, individuated units of consciousness, are made in the image of the larger consciousness system, you see. And you can go through a lot of truths that didn't make any sense before, and now they say, oh, I get that. I see what they mean, you see. So I think that draws your religion to you more as you discard the stuff that isn't helpful and embrace more meaningfully the stuff that is helpful.
Very much.
So it does maybe modify your relationship with your religion, but only because you see it in a better light, not because you see it in a worse light.
I think that's wonderful. Devendra mentions a dear person in India is Deepak Chopra. He's presented a lot of valuable information to the Indian population through his wisdom. Interestingly enough, he was the one who led me to Your Big Toe. He did a Mind, Body, Soul series for PBS, and in it he said, physics has some sort of connection to this a bigger picture. It's not only stranger than we think, but it's stranger than we can think. And that got me thinking I needed to find what that connection was. And I kept Googling different things, string theory and my big toe, and that's how I found you. So he was certainly helpful to me. Going on.
Now, what is his background? Is he a physician?
He is. He's a
physician,
and he has a center in Southern California somewhere, and he's written many books on.
And from that kind of perspective, I would say that there is one truth. There's just one truth, but there's 1,000, 10,000 different expressions of that truth, and different ways of looking at that truth, and all of them are good. All of them are valuable, because everybody can't get it or understand it from the same perspective. People need different perspectives. They need perspectives that suit them and suit their culture, suit their nature. You see, the very right-brained people can be touched and can be communicated with one way, and the very left-brained people have to be touched and communicated in a very different way. So we need all these perspectives. So it's not that, this one's wrong and that one's right. It's everybody who is seeing the truth from their own perspective is valuable. So Deepak Chopra brings a lot of value to his culture. He brings a lot of notoriety to his culture. He's known all over. He's not just known in India. He's a figure of notability all over the world.
Absolutely.
You see, as is the Dalai Lama.
Yes.
A notable figure all over the world. So these people are very helpful in doing that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they understand everything. It doesn't mean that they have it all together.
No, he didn't have the physics connection that you have.
No, he said that there's bound to be this physics connection.
To be this connection,
and he almost implied that we may not ever really understand it very well, but here it is. Indeed, there is a physics connection.
There certainly is.
But it's not, it's not the way most physicists thought it would be. It's just the opposite. It's the understanding of consciousness that helps you derive physics, because consciousness is more fundamental.
Well, I didn't approach the understanding as a scientist. I approached it as an intuitive and someone who had searched for 30 years, starting with, oddly enough, Bob Monroe's book, Journeys Out of Body, because I knew there was a psychic connection. I knew there was more to this reality than we understood, and I wanted to understand that. And I kept reading good books. Bob's was one of them, and there was a TC in that book who was a physicist. That rings a bell, doesn't it?
That was me.
And that when I then found your book and got the connection there, I understood how it was that you could, as a physicist and as a consciousness researcher, come to writing this, My Big Toe, and everything fell into place. Everything, all of those pieces that were missing were now complete.
And I bet you also read an autobiography of a yogi.
I did.
So did I.
I certainly did. I read that before.
Yeah.
And what would drive me to read such a book, except to know that somewhere, barring any kind of beliefs or things like that, there were people who knew more about this reality than we have been told.
Yeah.
And that was true of Yogananda. Many things in there resonated. I saw the similarities, and the bigger picture.
Well, that's the thing. You read Yogananda, and all of his experiences and the things he witnessed and the things that he talks about in his book make really good sense. You can see how that fits in with the science of consciousness. So it's just it's another viewpoint. It's another way of looking at reality. And having talked about religion, I really ought to balance it with talking about the other side. not only is my big toe completely compatible with religion, but my big toe is completely compatible with atheism. Now, how can it be compatible with both? Well, atheists aren't necessarily all hedonists or those without any thoughts of anything bigger than themselves. Atheists just don't believe that there is a God, you see. But many atheists are also searching for meaning and substance and ethics and morals, and how do you know what's moral and what's not, and is it relative or is it not, is it fundamental? And they have all the same questions that religious people have along those lines. They just don't attribute it to a God. So they find my big toe, it's logical and scientific, and they go, that feels right, that resonates. I finally get this bigger picture, this sense of the spiritual connection, this bigger than just my intellect kind of idea, and now I have a rational structure to hang it on. And they feel so much better for having that rational structure, that it tells them what they're doing here, why they're here. It's not just everything's random. Your life doesn't matter. There is no point. That doesn't feel right to them. But that's where a lot of atheists end up after they leave religion. But it doesn't feel right because it's not right. And then my big toe is something valuable for them. So that's the other half of it. So it's a set of ideas that are very acceptable to those who have religion and culture, one or the other or both, and very acceptable to those who don't. There isn't any. It's for everybody. It's an equal opportunity philosophical system. There isn't anything that would push either one of those away or change either one of them's viewpoint in that sense, and that the atheist can still go on feeling that, well, look, I read my big toe and it makes me feel better. I was right. There is no God, just the larger consciousness system. Whereas the theist, like this lady, says, oh, I read my big toe and now I understand my God much better because I understand really what this religion was all about. Well, because to them, religion was more than dogma and ritual. Religion was spirituality. So both the atheist and the religious person can find value in the spiritual ideas and concepts that my big toe has, and the religious people can find connections to their own religion, to whatever that religion is, be it the ancient religion of the Maori, or be it the Christians or the Buddhists or the Hindus or the Muslims. They can find connections that go to the root of their own cultures and their own religions. So it's an idea for everyone. It's not just for religious people to update their religions to modern metaphors. It's there for atheists and agnostics and everybody to help them find their purpose and ways of being that are more productive, that they find their happiness, they find their joy, their sense of being a part of the whole, of something bigger. And that's a very positive thing. And without that, you're kind of left like adrift and rudderless, with no point, no purpose. And that's not as satisfying as if you really understand how the world works. And once you understand consciousness and you realize that same logic derives physics, derives quantum mechanics, now suddenly you feel more confident. Maybe this set of ideas, maybe they're right because they're pretty good at deriving science too, not just metaphysics, but also physics. So when physics and metaphysics all fall out of the same set of ideas about consciousness, then that gives a generality to it. We don't have, many people in the world, particularly in the world where the Western culture is just now taking over, they have this quandary, and they have their metaphysical side over here, and then they have their logical side over here. And they have a kind of a wall between the two. They go out and are entirely in the rational world when they're at work, when they're at school, and then they come back and they have the inside world, maybe their religion or their cultural world on that side. But the two are kind of in conflict with each other. Now in India, you see, that's not so true. They have fundamentally a very big picture in their culture. Their spirituality and the rest of their life are all kind of, united together. But in most places in Western culture, that's not the case. The spiritual life and the everyday life are in two separate camps. Well, with MBT, they're all pulled together under one thing, because the spiritual part now also becomes rational. It's also logical. It's also scientific. So you don't have to have the logical side and then the spiritual side. The spiritual side is logical. You see? So it's pulling things together for people, not separating them from what they already have, but just enhancing what they already have. Be they atheist or be they theist, it just enhances
that is
both
the value.
sides. Yeah.
Well, I think we can move on to our Germany and to New York City, and sort of combine that. It's both a Western culture. One is your Western culture of Europe, and the questions from Frankfurt were more interested in the MBT that we've already discussed about, and the indigenous cultures and the commonalities. But I think Western culture in general, what I have from New York, or received from one of our team members, when I got to thinking about it, I realized that New York City has at least two signature cultural traits: an emphasis on business, on money making, an emphasis on tolerance and being cosmopolitan. So if I was going to ask questions or have Tom address issues that were culturally specific to New York City, I would ask questions related to these two traits. For example, I might ask that the MBT perspective on investing in or working for corporations that do destructive things, such as pollute or exploit workers. I might also ask about having an intense focus on making as much money as possible, which is not uncommon here. Similarly, I might ask how one should respond when people from very different cultures move into one's own community in large numbers, as has happened in New York City. And just to make it interesting, I might ask about the MBT perspective on culture. What does Tom have for the many people in New York City who work in some aspect of the arts, such as theater, music, and the museums?
Well, that's a whole lot. That's a whole lot. Well, spirituality is human. It's not located in any one culture. It's about being human and what it means. And actually, it's about being more than human, if you think of it in other terms. It's about being more than human. It's about being conscious. It's about morality. It's about choice. It's about what's important and what isn't. It's all about those things. And you can take those ideas and put them in any environment. You can put those ideas in New York City. You can put those ideas, out in the bush. You can put those any place, and they still mean the same things. You still relate to those things in the same way.
Well, his message on and his comment on theater and arts and music. Well, I watched the New York Philharmonic on New Year's Eve, and I thought, as I was watching the players, PBS gives you a very close-up picture of each of the musicians playing, and I thought how collectively, beautifully they worked together to make this one beautiful cooperative piece.
Yeah, it's nice. Very low entropy, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a very low entropy thing where all these individuals come to unite so precisely that one of 50 people plucks just the right string at just the right time, on this whole ongoing thing. Yeah, it's a very low entropy thing, which is art is an expression. It's how we express ourselves, and it's how we express that deep part of ourselves. Art doesn't express our intellect so much as it expresses our being level, and as we express our being level, one, it's us. It's honest, it's authentic, which is all very good. And as other people see and appreciate that art, it touches them at the being level. And any commerce you have at the being level, being aware of yourself, being authentic with yourself, making connections at that deeper level, is valuable. And art, of course, stimulates that, because art is of the being level.
You can
not so
see
much
that
of the intellect.
Of course, you can see that so well too in the theater. You drop who you are outside of that theatrical production, and you become a character. You become one with the whole production, and it's all about how the production runs and how synchronized it is, and how everybody works together. It just those things stood out to me as I watched them,
Sure.
and thinking, these are not individuals, these are working as a cooperative entity to make this beautiful presentation.
Sure. And we can talk about the money and the commerce, and also with the abuses that come with that, and the abusing of workers and people, and the using of them. It's not all abuse. It's also giving them advantage, giving them salaries, giving them jobs, giving them things to do, giving them ways that they can contribute. So, it gives a lot. Max.
Hello, Max.
This is Max, by the way, for those of you who wonder what this little fuzzy critter's doing up here.
Contributing to the cultural connection.
That's Max. The business end of New York is a great challenge to learn how to do that business with compassion, how to do that business while being empathetic to your workers, to your customers. You see, it's a challenge to have that commerce and have it in a way that is cooperative and part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So it's not that you cut out business or the corporations are evil and need to be done away with. It's the people in them. The people in those corporations are expressing themselves, and they're expressing their level of consciousness quality or their level of spiritual growth. That's the expression that you're getting. What we need to do is raise that individual level of the quality of consciousness, and the behavior of the corporations will take care of itself, you see. So we don't want to be distracted with trying to fix corporations, because corporations aren't the problem. It's the people. And you can't fix somebody else. So all you can do is fix yourself. Let your light shine, and your light will encourage other people to fix themselves, and so on. So if you want to contribute the most to the world being a better place, start with yourself and get rid of your own fear and ego. And that's how you can contribute to it. So New York is just a bustling, busy place where a lot of people are very self-focused, going about their very busy days. And that's okay, because that's where we are. That's honest. That's authentic. That expresses us as we are. And you always have to start wherever you are. But from there, we need to learn how to grow up, become loved, care about other. You see, that sort of thing. So it's not you go to the big cities and they're evil places because they're all about commerce and business and so on. They're really no different than a small town. It's just a bunch of people expressing themselves, expressing their quality of consciousness. You can just do that in a bigger way, in a big city than you can down on the farm.
Of course.
So it's really people are the same all over. They're just expressing themselves in their quality. And it's always a challenge for those people to change and increase their quality. So, New York has a lot to offer on all sides. It has a very big culture of the arts. It also has a very big culture of business. It's got its seedy side. It's got its violent side. It's got its poetic side. It's got its intellectual side. It's got all the sides there are anywhere in the world. You'll find those sides in any really big city, but maybe especially in New York. So, it's a melting pot of humanity, and most big cities are that as well. They're almost acultural in the sense that they have so many people from so many cultures that they are a place where you can get new ideas, because there's always new ways of thinking of things. You're not so much in ruts, because there's so many people doing so many things that if you just pick your head up once in a while and look around, you can learn all sorts of things in that kind of an environment.
Here is a cultural melting pot, and here's where you can test out how you can overcome the boundaries of cultures,
right,
and see it from a bigger picture.
Exactly. If you're working on kindness and not being angry, New York's a great place to work on that lesson, because there's lots of things in New York that will make you angry, from the traffic to the noise, to the constant hassles and demands and the expense and all the rest of it. Well, deal with it, and deal with it with grace. And when we talked about Germany, but there was one thing about Germany that makes them special, and that is, if we look at the German philosophers, German philosophy, we will find a group that were called the idealists. Kant comes to mind as maybe the culmination of all of that, right? And we find people who, these idealists, believed that there was something bigger than just us and our physical world. They were about the big picture. And they all had different ideas about how this big picture existed, and they had different schemes for it and whatever. But German philosophy kind of birthed those ideas and were the fulcrum of them for many, many years. They saw these larger picture. Man is not just a body, but more than that. It's kind of the spiritual realm. Now, they didn't all necessarily call it the spiritual realm, but the idealists had the idea that non-physical things, consciousness, was fundamental. And that was right. It was a good idea. So we need to give the Germans a plus for having that viewpoint. And I just mentioned just one. There's probably a dozen or more of well-known philosophers that fall into that category. And yes, there was a few in France, and there was some in England, and there's some spread all over the world. But Germany was kind of the center of that. Now, so we give Germany high marks for understanding bigger pictures. For a century or two, anyway, they were kind of leading the world in that sort of viewpoint. At the same time, we're going to give the Germans very high marks for the contributions that they made to quantum mechanics and to physics at around the turn of the century. It was Werner Heisenberg. It was Schrödinger. It was Wigner. It was, I don't know, I just named a few of them, 3 or 4 or 5 more. And of course, it was also Einstein, but he wasn't a really big quantum mechanics contributor. He was more the relativity guy. And there was Bohr. He was in Denmark. That's where the Copenhagen interpretation, because they met on Bohr's home territory in Copenhagen in Denmark. But if you look at the scientists that grouped together in Copenhagen, you'll probably find more Germans than any other nationality there. They were at the forefront also of the revolution in thinking. And if you look at all those scientists from that time, Planck was another one, right? Max Planck. And I'm sure there's just dozens more that's just not coming to my mind right now. But if you read the things they wrote after they had done some experiments, after the double-slit experiment, after they had kind of created the science of quantum mechanics, you will find all sorts of quotes that posit a reality being much bigger and broader than just the physical. You'll find all kinds of stuff that give credit to consciousness, that give credit to a larger reality, and so on. So not only did they do the science, not only did they do the math, if you will, and create the science, they also understood what the logical implications of that science was. And they wrote about it. And then 30 years later, they were old and gone, because they were mostly in their 30s and 40s and 50s and so on. So when they were gone, so were the ideas of reality being bigger. Suddenly we went back to Newton, and everything's physical. It's all particles. And that double-slit experiment in quantum mechanics, nobody will ever understand that. That's just weird science, you see. But it's all physical. That's not only the Germans, but the others, Bohr also and the rest of them. All those original people who had the genius to create quantum mechanics also had the genius to see that it was telling them reality was a whole lot bigger than the physical. But then we lost that. The people that came after didn't have that same vision that those founding fathers had. And I think again, if you counted up all the people in that photo, they come from, there's a photo of the Copenhagen group, and there's a whole, I don't know how many people, there's probably 60, 70 people in that photo. It's a big photo. And of course there's Bohr and Heisenberg and Einstein, and Schrödinger. They're all sitting up on the front row. And they're from all over the world. They weren't just from Germany, obviously. They were from lots of places in Europe and outside of Europe as well, and the U.S. and so on. But Germany certainly had probably the largest contingent of scientists in that group. As a matter of fact, Albert Einstein was an expatriate German, right? So we have to give Germany some credit. They've had a very large impact on the world, both in science and in philosophy.
Absolutely.
A much larger impact than the size of their country versus the size of the rest of the world would indicate.
Of course.
So they've been a very influential and a kind of a seedbed of thought for centuries. And of course, you go back in past history and we say, the Germanic tribes, overran everybody. They were the barbarians, right? So the German tribes were the barbarians. They sacked Rome. They basically, English has Germanic roots.
Mm-hmm.
They populated and kind of overran all of Europe. And we look at them as the bloodthirsty barbarians, right? But yet we have to give them credit for also being the center of intellectual excellence in philosophy and science both for
Absolutely.
many, many, many years. So I think Germany is a very fitting place to bring my big toe at the end of this, because in a sense Germany was there at the very beginning of it, from the quantum mechanics theorists who said this physical reality isn't all there is. There's other dimensions to this that are bigger, and from the idealists who said the same thing, but in terms of philosophy. So I kind of have a soft spot in my heart for the contribution that the Germans have made. Of course, they also made a contribution of World War I and World War II, but
there was that.
Nobody's perfect, right? That's just the way it is. But I think Germany is a very fitting place to end this thing, because they were at the beginning of it. philosophically and scientifically. And all of that all of that was contribution to where we are now.
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for the scientists who came up with quantum mechanics, we'd still be, we still are. We'd still be Newtonians, right? We'd all be Newtonian physicists, but we're not. We're relativistic and we're quantum mechanics, and we still all swear by Newton, even though we know that that deterministic reductionism, materialism, those things just don't work. They're not. They're not credible, and they knew it then, and they wrote about it then, and eventually everybody forgot it because nobody knew what to do with that. They said, "Okay, you're right. It's about consciousness. It's about this bigger reality. Now what? Where's the equation on the bigger reality? How can we tie that into the physical reality?" And after everybody looked at each other, they decided, well, let's just go on. Let's let that be for a while because we just don't know where to go there. We don't see an opening in that. We see that it's true, but we just don't see an opening in what we can do with that. How can I write papers about something that is just don't understand? We don't seem that we will ever understand it. So they went off about their business and forgot all about it. And then, like I say, 20, 30, 40 years later, the world is back to Newtonian physics. Everything's physical, even though they know that that's not really true.
Now, as far as Australia, we've got some really helpful team members there. We also have some people planning to come to the workshop who have friends who are Aboriginal, and that is an indigenous culture, a very old indigenous culture.
It would be very interesting to see whether MPT has any resonance with their
It would, and I'm sure they
ancient history.
They have what they call the dream time, which is the non-physical, and I'm sure you can draw some of the MBT theory into that as well. But recently, more modernly, Australian National University, and we talked about this in an interview we did, a recent physics experiment.
Just a few months back, we had an interview about John Archibald Wheeler's thought experiment.
That's right.
That finally, 20 or 30 years later, somebody was clever enough to figure out how to actually do that experiment. So, yes, that was also a major contribution to this, because what it did was that it was just one more piece of hard experimental evidence that says that this reality isn't just physical, because physical realities don't do those kinds of things. You see, they don't act that way. They can't act that way. It's incompatible with material reductionism. It's incompatible with this deterministic view of the world, this Newtonian view of the world. Can't work like that. So it's just one more nail in the coffin of materialism, really. But every nail is welcome. And this one was a long time coming. Like I say, it took, Archibald Wheeler died in 2003 or 4 or something like that, the early 2000s, first decade of the 2000s. I can't remember exactly.
2006 it might have been.
2006, something like that. And he died a very old man. He lived a ripe old age. But so it took from then till today before somebody was clever enough to figure out how to do that.
So
and,
good on you.
Give the Aussies a big check mark on that, because that was a hard problem to solve, and they solved it.
So good on you, Australia.
But Australia is a very interesting place. Of course, I'm really looking forward to going there. It's a neat place. And, of course, it will be easier there because they speak English like I do. Well, not exactly like I do, but close enough that we will be able to understand each other. So it will be... New Zealand is like that, too. Of course, New Zealand also has English colony, but they also have the Maori. And
Kippa has his own language. He does.
Yeah, and they have their own language as well. And as hopefully, either they will have translators or that the Maori will know enough English because if they
do.
need me to speak Maori, it's not going to work too well.
I believe they do.
So that's the thing. I'm kind of stuck with English as the only language that I speak well, and that makes Australia and New Zealand and London, England and Ireland are kind of the natural places for me to go. But India also speaks a lot of English.
They do, and we have translators.
Germany speaks a lot of English.
We have translators. We'll have translators in Germany and translators in India, and we've always have people who have helped subtitle your workshops, and we have people around the world who've worked on your books. There's a book your first book is out in German. Your other books in foreign languages are being worked on in French and
yes, and that makes another good point about a value of this multicultural tour that we're doing. Every place we go, we're going to try to capture video of what takes place there. Mm-hmm. And if we have a situation where we have live translators, in other words, it gets translated as I talk. So there are those people listening in English to my speech, but there are also translators translating that into,
German or Hindi.
Hindi or German at the same time. Uh-huh. Well, then that translated line gets recorded along with the English line, mm-hmm. and eventually we will put all of these videos back out on YouTube mm-hmm. for the public. Now, that means that we'll have a discussion of MBT that'll be in German rather than it just being stuck in English because that's the only language I know, or in Hindi so that it will have a much wider audience, you see.
Of course.
And that, I think, is a wonderful thing. It provides a kind of an on-ramp, an access to this material to those who speak German and those who speak Hindi who don't necessarily speak English well enough to read my book in it or to listen to the video in it. They're more comfortable with the translation. So it just enlarges the people that now have access to the ideas. And I think that is wonderful. So I'm really looking forward to both India and in Germany of coming out, I hope, with if everything works right and all the cameras work and all the sound works, it's a technical challenge too. But to come out of that with all of the talk, all the questions, all of the interaction that we have in German and in Hindi, that I think would be would be marvelous. So that's another reason that I'm looking forward to this, is that it gives us that advantage of putting MBT material in a foreign language.
Very good.
And I think that's marvelous.
It is. Thank you, Tom, for this fascinating preview of the Cultural Connection Tour. Each country, I look forward to each country and what you have to offer them with your MBT theory.
Well, it's not so much what I offer them is what they take away. I offer maybe a different perspective of the same things that many of them already know, but seeing it in a different light. And sometimes that different light and different perspective can be valuable.
Very.
And I hope that, it's not that I'm bringing them a great gift as much as hopefully they will take away a great gift of their own making.
Oh, that's very nicely put. Thank you so much.
That's sort of the way I see it. And thank you very much for bringing this up and having your interviews. I always love to have interviews with you, Donna.
Thanks, Tom.
It's always fun, and maybe it'll give some of the people in these countries where we're going some idea of what we're about and what MBT is about, and kind of why we're coming there, just because it's there. We can.
We can.
And we hope it will do some good and leave some love and joy, as we pass through.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tom.
Oh, Donna, before we go, there was one other thing I wanted to mention about that issue of vegetarianism and Hinduism, and that in MBT there is also a moral issue with the eating of meat, with the killing and consuming sentient beings just for our pleasure. So besides the other issue, there's a moral problem.
Now, is that
with
your
as well.
MBT theory, or is that the theory of...
No, in
Indian
MBT
culture?
is about spirituality. Spirituality is a component of what's moral and what isn't moral. So the morality has to do with the MBT theory itself. And with that morality, it's not that tigers can't eat their prey. That's different. It's when you kill things for pleasure that it becomes a moral problem. So not if you kill things because you have to survive. That's not the thing. But killing for pleasure is not a thing. Killing other sentient animals because they taste good, it's not a good enough reason. So that's another issue that we have.